Welcome to another edition of Practical Pet Chat. Thanks for joining us. Lorin and I really appreciate you taking the time. Lorin, how are things going for you?
Good, Rob. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. But I've gotten some emails and some reach outs from friends, and I'm sure you get the same thing. It just seems to be that time of the year, although that time of the year seems to have now extended all 12 months of the year. But folks are asking about itching, licking, scratching, and what that means. Should they be concerned? Do I rush to the vet? Why does this happen? So many questions. So I thought maybe we do a not deep dive, but an overview starter session for the folks about some of the things to start looking at, considering, and when is that time for you to get to a vet? So let's start with you and your experience because I know even I would reach out to you when I would have those things happening because every animal is different. And so there's a whole slew of things that we've got to take into consideration when we see this behavior. Because that's what it is, by the way, folks. It starts, and in some cases, it's just simply a behavior. In other times, it may be something much more significant and deeper that needs more attention and maybe professional help for.
Yeah, I had to pick one of those 5-minute topics, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
This is going to need to be probably a three-parter
I
because this
completely
this
agree with
is yeah, this is not a one size fits all type of uh, response. There's layers to this, so let's start peeling the onion. So it used to be a certain time of year,
you. Yeah.
and it still is to some degree, depending on where people live. You know, I know California, it seemed like it just became year round. Here in Texas, it feels like that as well. Um, but obviously, when things are blooming, it's the same thing with our allergies, and it's watery eyes, itchy, throat, nose is dripping. It sounds like a commercial. Um, I almost never advise going to the vet.
Interesting.
There has to be some serious skin issues before the vet gets brought in, because, and I say that because without calling out brands or anything like that, there are things that vets recommend that I couldn't be more against, that appear to placate the symptoms, but underneath the skin, that's still all roiling. It just isn't coming out. You're not seeing it. And
Yep.
for a lot of people, they figure if they can't see the symptoms, it's not happening. And that's not true. I mean, it just, that's like saying if you can't see something going on under the ground, it's not happening. Well, when bulbs pop back up, in the spring, obviously they were living under the ground. It's the same thing with so many things. Um, and I've seen the end result of using some of the veterinary recommendations. Um, so the primary thing that has to happen is you have to be dialed in early and from the beginning. The longer that this goes on, the more chemicals you put on board, the more things that interfere with the body's, waving of its red flags. Hey, hey, pay attention. This is going on, which is how that should be viewed. It isn't something that you want to make go away because the issue isn't going away, just the red flags are. The red flags are the body's way of saying, please pay attention to this. This is an issue for me. So there's a number of things depending on how bad and how early that you dial into this. In a particular area, you want to look for local honey, that is collected and cultivated for your particular area, because a lot of times that will help to alleviate. However, I say that with just a little bit of a cautionary. Remember that honey still has a sugar, for lack of a better word, sugar content to it. And I'm not a big fan of that, so I like to moderate. what the take-in is of that. And it's not something necessarily to give year round. It's just something to give when the symptoms are showing. There are other things that can be done. There are fish oils, that can help with the coat. There are things like my favorite, which helped a lot of my clients, was you let your dog out, they go outside, they walk around, everything's in bloom, pollen is settling. They put their foot down and their foot spreads, the toes spread. They pick their foot up and the toes come together. And so they're collecting. And then they get inside and they sit down and they either lick or they're scratching the back of their ear or something, and little tiny pollen spread is happening. So just taking, I would teach a lot of my clients just have a bottle of water and a bunch of towels, microfiber towels, whatever, they're cheap and expensive. And the reason I say a bunch is because you don't want to use a towel and then later on use it again because you're just going to displace all the pollen again. And wipe your kid down when they come in. Wipe their fur down, wipe in between their toes, wipe around their face, wipe, around orifices that are around their face, eyes, nose, mouth, because that's where the pollen's going to be the most egregious, around the ears, that kind of thing. That helps a lot. Look at what you're feeding. There are things that really contribute to allergen response. I really recommend fresh food. It's ideal. We aren't living in war times anymore, which is how we got around to creating, a dog food like, kibble and things like that. So I don't think we have that requirement. We've gotten used to it. So feeding real food, whole food, helps to limit that. And there are foods that will help to mitigate some of that as well. So there's a number of things. And of course, you have to, I like, okay, so I like quote unquote allergy or sensitivity tests, but I have a caveat to them. The ones that the vets do typically test for environmental allergens and not really a lot of food ingredients. So they'll test, I don't know, I think the most I've ever seen on one is maybe 8 to 12 ingredients. Well, that's not really helpful. There's a lot of ingredients in a lot of different foods. So I'm not a big fan of the veterinary ones until they find a way to make them more detailed. But regardless of whether it's a veterinary one or one done by a private company, whomever it is, including one that might be created by a vet or created with vet oversight, my cautionary statement is this. They're a guideline. They're a place to start. They're not the long term. Because if you continue to do those tests as time goes on, then you will see changes. I like them because it's something that a consumer wants to see. They want to see it in black and white, or in this case, red when it flares. So
Right.
they want to see that. And that is a place to say, okay, so we're going to take all of these things out. We're going to go to a baseline of as few ingredients as possible. And then we'll see how that quells the response. And if we're having good luck with that, we'll start to add in some other things because people don't understand that just because, for lack of a better protein, let's just say beef, if it says that your kid is really flaring on beef, I have people who will never feed beef again. I'm like, why? And they're like, well, because that test said they couldn't have beef. I said, no, that's not what the test said. The test said that they're flaring in beef. Could it be that the flare is in relationship to consumption with other ingredients that cause that flare? So we need to take it all down to nothing. And if beef by itself doesn't flare, we know it's not beef, right? And if we combine beef with, I don't know, whatever your kid might be sensitive to, salmon oil, well, then the likelihood is it's the salmon oil. And so it's also not a quick fix. It's not an easy answer. It takes
Right.
time and focus and dedication. I recommend to my clients complete they keep a journal and they complete that daily. So I can take a look at that. What did you add? What did you take away? I usually will write it out for them. I see them once a week, and I look at their journal and then I ask for particular responses and what has happened. What's been really great is when clients come back after a year, we've gotten their kid on a good track. And keep in mind that the more time that goes by that you leave this unattended, the harder this is to mitigate. So I get them on a good track, and let's say the kid they thought was sensitive to chicken, but somebody at a barbecue gave their kid a piece of chicken, and the kid had no negative response. All right, so remember we talked about don't get focused on one ingredient. It's just not that, people want a quick fix, and that's why the drug choice it seems to be the one that people go to because it looks like it's working. They don't see what's happening underneath. And I get particularly frustrated if somebody says to me, well, the dog is scratching all night. I mean, it's just, they're keeping me awake. Okay. The response is not to give your kid a chemical. The response is, let's get this fixed. Maybe your kid sleeps, out in the living room for a few nights until we can get this under control. And let's just, I have to oftentimes write out the whole process and the whole plan because it's not that people, um, they're not dumb about it. They just don't know and they don't understand how the body is responding to these allergens. And the other response for a lot of people is to give Benadryl,
Yeah.
an antihistamine. That's the common antihistamine that's on the market. And they give Benadryl. Again, this is something that is meant for use in things like a bee sting where there's swelling or other. This is not something to maintain. This kid shouldn't maintain their life on any antihistamine at all. So that right there barely touches it. Barely
But,
touches where we start.
but that's a lot of great info. You hit on so many things there. I was making notes. But the first thing I want to say, for those who have been listening for a while, apparently you actually do like journaling
I
all the
don't.
all the
I don't
time.
I don't
No,
journal.
no, I am marking this in the history of practical pet chat. Lauren is advocating a journal. No,
But that's
makes sense.
because people can't remember. You know what I mean?
That's always been my point, Lauren.
They come in and I ask such specific questions. They're like, "Oh, I don't know." And I'm like, "Oh, write that down for me." I don't
I,
like to journal, but I
you,
I support
okay,
people who do.
okay. I'm with you on that. And you're right. It's much better than, well, here's the pictures. And I'm like, oh my gosh, a picture is a snapshot in time.
You're
I need
right.
a much bigger,
Details.
work with. Yeah. But I do like that you and you're right. This is the starting point because the other point as you made was you can't assume it's one thing because if it just started and you're not aware of everything that was going on, I mean, you got to walk it back.
Right.
And that's that part of like, did this just start or has it been something slowly, gradually building up? And I like that you talked about. I'm with you. I'm not a big turn to pharma guy. That is not my first course of action. Um, I'm probably a little more liberal than a lot of folks out there when it comes to that, though, which is always, hey, if we've tried everything else, sure, I'm going to give that a try as well, if nothing else has made it. That being said, and if you can't hear Lauren's head violently shaking, I just want to call that out for those on the
Because there's a couple of
podcast.
drugs out there that no
I
matter
no, I
what,
agree. I agree with you 100%. Listen, if you're doing something that has the chance to cause as much or more harm than what you're trying to treat, it's a lose-lose because you're not really going to know whether it's having a positive impact, no matter what the outcome is, because of those negative side effects and things that happen. And I love that you are pointing out many times this is an internal thing. And you got to start there. I mean, the amount of folks, and I don't want to divert too much, but I will say that used to bring up to me, I've got this beautiful white, puppy, but the tear stains, and I'm trying this and that and that. And I'm like, this is all starting from inside. What are you doing for the inside? What are you looking at in the diet? What are you looking at? And I'm a big supplement guy, and in this aspect here too. That's one of the other things that I think this is because I use a herbal mix when I see that happening. Um, what I This is the perfect example of a cycle on, cycle off supplement.
Yes.
There are times when I will be proactive and use this mix, and my family and friends will use this mix proactively. And then when we get past that time frame, we'll cycle off, and we'll do that even during the high season because I'm a big believer in cycling on, cycling off, cycling different foods and proteins, all the rest of that. And I like that you said that about the testing. I love that we have tests available, but it's just another tool. It is not an
It's just
answer.
a tool, right? It's just a
Yeah.
tool.
And so for me, I know some of the folks who've created some of those.
Yeah, me too.
And I appreciate that. And there was a need for that. Um, but I also feel that, and I'm glad you called it out, you get the results and people overreact or they just don't have the depth of knowledge in, okay, great, I got this information. Now what do I do with it? And so the default is, as you said, I'm never going to feed X or Y again. Okay, that's certainly a choice. It's not the choice I would make.
The wrong
And
choice.
yeah, and exactly. And I would also add in too that when you call out the fact that remember how things are prepared, how things are mixed, can also change the chemical structure
Right.
of all of that. And so beef in a kibble, if you're going to be generous with it actually being in the kibble, but beef in the kibble um, is not the same as a cut of beef that hasn't been cooked or alterated in any sense and way. So I love that you said that the fresh feeding. And to me, I would just maybe I want to, kind of put a little flag there for folks. It might be interesting. I know I've done it when I've, gotten some of these tests back where I have said, okay, I'm going to try a raw piece to see, not overdo it. We don't want to cause a huge reaction, but I want to see. Um, and a part of that is, unfortunately, I have seen and heard so many times where folks have come back and they're like, I can only feed now one protein because of these tests. And that is really limiting. Now, it's a good thing they come to me because I know you all out there who have been listening for a while know that I'm going to say there are other proteins. They're not anybody, especially Lauren's favorites, but there is cricket.
We're
There
not
is.
talking about bugs right now. No, no. Let's not go into the bug
So we
world.
could be talking about bugs in the parasite way, though.
That'll
And
be the third chapter of this
okay, yeah.
particular.
But no, and I do love that you call out there. It's so funny. Because you got the paw plungers and all these different types of things to clean. And I never discount that. But what I will say is they'll plunge it and then use the towel
The
and then
same water.
yeah, each time, each paw, and
Uh-huh.
it's like, well, we just created a stew to
Yeah, pollen.
breathe it. Yeah. So let's also just be like real. I know it takes an effort, but I love that you share the one of, oh, I couldn't sleep all night. Hey, if you're one of those folks who's struggling because it sucks. I know it sucks to see your pet struggle. That means you got to put a little bit more effort in and you're
Right.
going to have to commit a little bit more time if you want to get to the bottom of what's going on. And that's the last point I'll just, reiterate that you shared. This isn't a quick fix. And I think that's why it's really elevated and becoming a almost year round. Because the other part of what you said, which was so smart, is you don't see anything, and then they come back and they lay in that bed that they've had for 6 months or 2 seasons, or maybe it even that 6 months went across 3 seasons. So think about all of these different things. What is your pet coming into contact with? That has to be journaled. I love that Lauren
Ugh.
said. I'm gonna harp on that. But you gotta, take a look. When's the last time you cleaned that? What did you clean it with? How often are you seeing the need to deal with what's going on outside, inside, with the foods, with all when things are running smooth, it's great, right? And we have a tendency to get into this comfort level of, and I do it myself. Oh, everything's great. Bell's wonderful. Sugar, Zoe, everybody's just plugging along. Life's great. Life's glamorous. Something happened. And now I've got to identify this as if it just happened in the last 24 hours when it may have been a buildup over a
Right.
period of time. And so that's the thing about this. It typically does not happen an hour before you see it. So you're not going to fix it within an hour of seeing it either. It's going to take
Right.
some time. It's going to take some effort, and you're going to have to be aware of that and keep that going moving forward.
So I think also too, when you look at some of those sensitivity, allergy tests, whatever the current vernacular for them is, um, they always test for environmental, which I always find somewhat amusing because you can't fix environmental. I had
Right.
a client who took out all of everything living out of her backyard, concreted
Oh,
everything in, right? And she goes, I don't understand. I did all this and she's still having allergy responses. How can that be? I said, well, did your neighbors concrete everything in? If you got people all around you, front, I mean, back, both sides. Did they concrete everything in? And she looks at me and I go, and it's windy. So you know that stuff travels, right? And she's like, crap. I didn't think about any of that. I said, well, that's why you're supposed to come and talk to me before you do stuff like that. She goes, I concreted my entire backyard. I said, I know. I'm sorry, but you're not going to avoid that. The other part of that too is she had a little light colored dog, and people don't know that white or light colored dogs and cats are more prone to allergies. Just like people that are blonde or fair skinned or more prone to skin sensitivity, sunburn, all kinds of things. Light colored animals are much more sensitive to allergens. So they need to be aware of that early on. There's a number of things that disrupt the immune system that allow for allergens to become an issue. And that can be over vaccination. That can be the wrong kind of diet. That can be chemicals in the environment, chemicals that are used either in washing or drying of any type of laundry, including their beds or anything that they lay on. Anything flea, heartworm, any of those, everything that disrupts the immune system just allows something negative to take hold. Um, you talked about the, people sticking to one protein and that is such the wrong thing. I had a dog that she's white and she was itchy, which, they're slightly itchy anyway when they're light colored. But it increased and I noticed that. And so I ran one of these sensitivity tests and I did so because I had done a vet one, even though my vet tried to talk me out of it. I did the vet one and I was like, well, this is lacking. And he goes, I told you. And I said, I know, but nerd, I wanted to see what it looked like. And then I did one of these sensitivities tests that, had come out in the market. And I wanted to compare the two. And they were similar in the things that they identified, that one being less, numerous. But what was particularly interesting to me is something I never fed. She flared on, which was rabbit. So I made it a point to feed her rabbit every so often in rotation because there is a theory that has been proven many times, and it's not 100% at all, but that the way to build up tolerance is through exposure. And I knew that that would be a plus for her, and it was. And so rabbit was part of her routine. But I can see people being afraid of that because they don't know about, building up tolerance and tolerance to exposure. Um, the other thing that's very egregious is grains. Things that are dry are egregious to allergens. Dry food, um, grains are dry, even though when they're cooked, they become wet. They're still a dry basis. And they're not like Whole Foods. Meat is wet all the way through until you dry it out. Vegetables, same thing. So if you can, I know that there is that push now, and I see it more so in different parts of the country where people have locked onto the grain thing again because of the proven completely false DCM uh, debacle that came about. And now they think grains are a way to keep heart disease from happening, which, that has no effect whatsoever. That part of nutrition has no effect whatsoever on the heart. Um, but when they cut out the grains, they stick to things that are whole food, that are moist in nature and moist in how it's being fed. They see a mitigation of symptoms. That's not by accident. That's the body responding more favorably. Getting out of dry food for a kid that's extreme, getting into something wet. It can be canned. It doesn't have to be. Canned is highly processed too. But we're talking about degrees of relativity here. If I can get a kid out of kibble and the parent, maybe it's a 100-pound kid, and they can't afford to feed fresh. So I get them into something wet like a canned food, and I'm like, can you add a little bit of, you know, meat to this here and there, whatever y'all are eating at home, or add a little bit of fresh vegetables to it too, just so there's some whole food added to it. And they come back and they're like, that's amazing that that could have that much of an effect. Well, it's not really. If you understand how the body is responding to the constant buildup of the same types of things that just allow for allergens to take a better foothold, and
Right.
take over your kid. Um, I really think that the answer uh, to controlling allergens is going to be 100% into diet and focusing on a complete reduction. Maybe you can't to in total, but I don't necessarily agree with that either because, I ran my business for years on avoiding chemicals um, in animals. I think that if you can completely reduce the chemical exposure as best as possible, then you're going to see a turnaround in the kid.
Yeah, one other one I wanted to just call out too is so I live in California, but I've got, a pool and all that. And so we can use that year round. But we are coming up to those summer months. And you sparked something in me where I was thinking about something that happened last year where I was talking to a really good friend who lives down your way and happened to visit. And long story short, got in the pool. We were all there. The dogs are jumping in. It's just amazing. What a fun time. But I will say, we got out of the pool and I was like, man, I feel so like my skin feels dry and tight. And I don't know what it is. Did you just put a lot of chlorine like before? He's like, oh, yeah, I just added a little because I knew everybody was coming down. And I was like, yeah, how often do the dogs get in the pool? Like this time of year, daily. And I was like, yeah, that's what your problem is. Okay. So all these other things you think it is, you might just want to dial back on the chlorine a little bit, my friend,
Well,
because
again, it's a chemical, right?
chemical, and that's what triggered me was you don't think about some of the things because it's like I've got to do pool care 101, chlorine and chemicals going in, unless you're a saltwater pool, which I totally love. Long story short is that's that same thing. It's the same thing with people who bring in different plants into their homes and all that. Your cats, your dogs. Not only are there plants that are very dangerous, but there are different plants that will kick out things at different times. And the last thing I just wanted to hit on is that I laughed. She concreted the entire yard. That sparks me on a conversation we're going to have about organic and some of the fallacies and realities around that. But the secondary part is to really accomplish what she was trying to accomplish. Ain't nobody leaving the house, ain't nobody leaving the property, because you're bringing that all back in too.
Right.
You're wearing clothes, you're wearing your shoes, all the rest of that. You're tracking through it still. So no one's trying to say bubble wrap your pups or your cats and everything will be great. It's a get a greater awareness of the things that are impacting what you feel you can do something for, do something for. And
Right.
you should see a difference. I like a number of the suggestions you put out there were just phenomenal. So thank you.
Well, you brought up the saltwater pool too. Just to touch on that, I
Yeah.
had a client who completely switched from chlorine to saltwater, thinking
Uh,
natural, right? I said, "Your Golden's getting in the pool every day." Oh, she lives in the pool all day long, drying the skin out with the salt.
with the
He's
salt,
like,
right? Too much
"I
salt.
can't win." And I said, "No, you just have to understand,
Well, yeah,
how
yeah, exactly. Whether it's and just to hit on this, so we don't leave it open ended there. The point on that again is they get out of the pool. Let's rinse them down. Think about it
right,
just from your own the way that at least I do it. Get out of the pool. You rinse off to get those chemicals off, to get the salt water off. You get out of the ocean, same thing. That's why those showers are there. Nobody's taken, with shampoo and everything else. It's just, hey, let's get that what isn't normally on us
right.
rinse. So, no, I love that. So many great suggestions, and I agree with you. We just barely scratched the surface.
Oh
So
gosh.
apparently, we did this episode, and we are now scratching, and we've made our audience scratch. I'm not sure that that was a great direction in my thinking process. So, for all of you out there, I do hope you picked up some good thoughts and tips and things that you can be aware of. Um, Lorin, it is always so informative to talk with you, which is why we do these. But if you've got an idea out there or something that you're doing, I know everybody's got home remedies. I'll let Lorin vet those. But from the standpoint of reaching out to us, sharing your stories, please do. We're seeing an uptick in all the different media platforms, and it's just tiresome to list them all out. So I'm just going to say, if you got something and you want to make sure we get eyes on it, send it over to us. Practicalpetchat@gmail.com. Visit us on the web, your social media channels, all the rest of that. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for being a better pet parent. We really appreciate you. Lorin, I appreciate you. Thanks for joining me here.
Likewise, thanks everybody.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as, nor should it be construed as, professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment for your pets. Always seek the advice of a qualified veterinarian with any questions you may have regarding your pet's health or medical condition. Never disregard professional veterinary advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The hosts and the guests of this podcast are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared during these episodes. Any reliance on the information provided is solely at your own risk. Copyright 2025 Practical Pet Chat, all rights reserved. Unauthorized duplication, distribution, or reproduction of any content from this podcast, including but not limited to audio, scripts, and show notes, is prohibited without prior written consent. The opinions and views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Practical Pet Chat.